This is a QueenB Radio High School Sports presentation.
Hello and welcome to the premiere of the QueenB Radio High School Sports Roundup. My name is Tyler Dictanis and we are excited to debut this brand new show covering our area's high school sports scene on the QueenB Radio Sports YouTube and SoundCloud channels. Today's show will preview the 2023 football season as we are just days, not months, not weeks, but days away from football season kicking off. And I will be joined by our high school football broadcasters to get their thoughts on each conference we'll be following this fall. But before we do that, let's tell you what this show is going to be all about. As the title implies, the High School Sports Roundup is going to cover all of the high school sports action in our area, not just the sports that we have live coverage of on our airwaves and YouTube channel. This is a brand new platform and brand new way for QueenB Radio to help showcase the accomplishments of all of our area's high school athletes, coaches, athletic directors, officials, and the people who make high school sports in our area amazing. We'll have weekly recaps from the previous week, previews of the upcoming week, a weekly one-on-one with a great one interview presented by People's State Bank, news, and more, including weekly features to highlight the accomplishments and big moments in our area, like the highlight reel, our Plays of the Week segment showing the top plays from the previous week, a school spirit segment showing some of the performances from marching bands, cheerleaders, and dance teams, and the difference maker, recognizing student athletes making a difference both in the game and in their school and community. We will begin weekly episodes of the High School Sports Roundup next Thursday, August 24th, on the QueenB Radio Sports YouTube channel and an audio-only version of the show on the QueenB Radio Sports SoundCloud channel. We want to feature all the big moments and accomplishments in our area's high school sports, and you can help us do that. Visit our website at am1590wpvl.com/sports roundup to send us your photos, videos, and results for our area's high school sporting events for a chance to be featured on the show. Coming up next, we'll be joined by our QueenB Radio High School football broadcasters to preview the upcoming high school football season, and later we'll chat with Cuba City Cubans head football coach Guy Kopp on our one-on-one with a great one interview presented by People's State Bank. All that and more when the QueenB Radio High School Sports Roundup continues after this on the QueenB Radio Sports YouTube and SoundCloud channels. Let's take a look at the upcoming QueenB Radio High School sports schedule. The high school football season kicks off on Thursday night when the Dodgeville Dodgers take on the Viroqua Blackhawks at 7 o'clock on 97.7 Country WGLR. We'll have 3 games on the QueenB Radio family of stations on Friday night, including a matchup between the Lancaster Flying Arrows and the Mineral Point Pointers on 97.7 Country WGLR at 7 o'clock. The Platteville Hillmen begin playing their final season at Pioneer Stadium when they host the number 3 ranked Darlington Redbirds on Extreme 107.1 at 7 o'clock. On Super Hits 106, the Cuba City Cubans begin their 2023 campaign against the Benton Scales Mountain Shullsburg Knights. You can also watch this game on the QueenB Radio Sports YouTube channel at 7 o'clock. On Tuesday night, our volleyball coverage begins with the River Ridge Timberwolves taking on the Lancaster Flying Arrows at 7 o'clock on 97.7 Country WGLR and the QueenB Radio Sports YouTube channel. A reminder that weekly episodes of the QueenB Radio High School Sports Roundup begin next Thursday, August 24th. For more information about the show, go to am1590wpvl.com/sports roundup. We're going to break down each conference and the teams that we're covering across the QueenB Radio family this season. But before we get into that, let's get some perspective from our head coaches that are on the panel here. We need to get coached up too, right? So let's turn it over to Wally Trouton and Scott Tolson. What are some of the things that these head coaches are emphasizing and focusing on with their teams over these couple weeks and heading into the regular season?
Well, the one thing I would look for is that, you're going to lose some kids from graduation, maybe a couple that didn't go out. So you're really looking at that depth chart. So those first week and a half of going through everything with non-contact, you're looking for the kids that are going to be your starters and your backups. And once you get into that contact, then you're going to be able to figure out if these are the kids you need in these spots. When I'm looking at my offense, I ran the wing T, and I really, by the first game, I wanted my base plays in. For those that know the wing T, it would have been a 20 series and a 30 series. I don't want to give too much to the kids because too much, then they kind of forget on things you can add in as you go along. Maybe some basic motion, again, trying to keep it simple for that first game. With your defense, your base defense, some stunts and coverages, and really emphasize on conditioning, because the first couple of weeks it's hot, and you want, your smaller schools, you're going to have kids playing both ways, so you want them to be in the best condition that they can. And you're looking at making sure your coaches are all on the same page and talking to them before practice, after practice, having coaches meetings later in the week, laying everything out. And then the main thing is working on perfection. Last year I watched the team, as I called their games, shoot themselves in the foot so many times that it actually would hurt them in a couple of the games. And you don't want those mistakes to happen, and you're trying to eliminate as many mistakes you can. So that's what this preseason is all about, is eliminating those kind of things. So, for me, that's what I'd be looking for as a head coach in the first week and a half before the scrimmage in your first game.
I pretty much agree with that. You want to try to find out, where is our base? I mean, is our base where we believe it is? Are we going to be there with the guys that we expect to be there? How have they progressed? We know what they've done in the weight room. We know if they've accomplished anything there. But how does that relate as to what's going to happen on the field? And the mental aspect of is probably the biggest part right here. The idea of dealing with the conditioning and dealing with the teaching of anything else that you're doing that may be a slight variation that's different from what you've done in the past. Hopefully you don't have a lot of that, because you really hate to have to go through with a whole reteaching of very much. But I think that's where you really have to be careful. And the more you throw at them, the bigger or the more the likelihood is that you're going to have those problems with the ball on the ground, the ball being picked off, and all of those mistakes that you really don't want to see, particularly here in the preseason. And you're initially going in, taking a look at, well, how are we going to line up against who we're scrimmaging? How are we going to handle what's going to happen here? Who are the kids that are going to step forward? And trying to find out, who are they? Because everybody is going to be looking for some people. You think you know who you've got, but who else do you have? And it's the who else that's going to make your season a success or not.
All right, and Josh, the assistant coaches, what are some of the roles that the assistants have in helping their head coaches get the team ready for the season?
Yeah, and that was a really good segue for that Wally had. It's kind of all about figuring out what you have. And the nice thing about being an assistant coach, and I've coached at JV head coach, offensive line coach, and I just have to say that assistants are probably the most important people on the team. But no, it's really about supporting your head coach, and there's so much time that goes into it too, and I'm sure only significant others and families of coaches can appreciate. And their role, the assistant, is kind of being able to laser focus and spend time with your position group or side of the ball to really help the head coach figure out, what we're looking at, what we have, do a lot of scouting, and just basically supporting the head coach, and, always see eye to eye, of course. But and then kind of in terms of game time preparation, kind of looking over the small details, making sure the practice schedule's good, and, just kind of being an extra set of eyes on the field and always communicating with the head coach.
You get the opportunity as an assistant coach to look down at the micro. The head coach has got to look at the macro. You have to get down and look at the micro. Okay, how are the steps and the techniques being used by our guards if they're going out if they're pulling or whatever they're doing? You have to get down to the nitty-gritty stuff, while the head coach is probably going to be dealing with a little more of a wider scope.
And more game plan type.
it's why being an assistant is probably more fun than being a head coach, because you get right down and dirty with all the serious coaching and the coaching points with the individual players.
Absolutely.
As they say, they get down and dirty with them. And, the assistant coaches are great. And that's probably one reason why I always stayed away from them, because they like to talk in your ear during game time and try to convince you that you ain't gonna want to do.
Oh yeah, I've been reprimanded a couple times on the sidelines. I heard you the first time.
Unless we're the guy that's sitting up in the booth and you got the headset on and I'm talking into it.
All right, let's move into our first conference. The SWC will be covering Lancaster and Platteville on our QueenB radio stations this season. And Tom Nisus, last year, this conference, probably the best way to describe it, was really weird. There were some teams that were blowing teams out, and then the next week they'd get blown out. You'd have instances where Lancaster goes into a game ranked number 10 in the state, and they lose to an 0-6 River Valley team at their homecoming. You have Broadhead Judah, that's been kind of a juggernaut. They lose 2 games to Prairie du Chien, who ends up winning the conference, running the table there. Help me make some sense of what that conference was last year and what are some of the things you're looking for heading into this year's campaign.
Well, I don't know if I can make any sense of last year, but I think Prairie du Chien really got their running game going. Shark and I did the game week 3 at Lancaster. They came in 0-2, but they had lost to Edgewood and they had lost to La Crosse Aquinas, 2 really good teams. And they ended up gashing the Lancaster rush defense, which is not an easy thing to do, for 301 yards in Lancaster, and they won 33-29. And they kept on winning, they kept on winning all the way to the state semifinal. They lost to a really good Mayville team. Now this year, Prairie du Chien starts with Aquinas and Darlington. So, they're not afraid to play tough competition. But I think Broadhead Judah will finish ahead of them in the conference. That's the prediction I make. 2 of Broadhead Judah's 3 losses were close ones to Prairie du Chien. You'd probably think maybe that will give them the extra motivation to get over the hump. They return their starting quarterback, their top wide receiver, their top running back. And I think the quarterback is the most important position on the field. It's always a great advantage to have that. And Prairie du Chien graduates their quarterback, who was a very good player. So it's going to be interesting. And I think in Lancaster, the only thing I'd say, and then I'd turn it over to Shark, is how does Lancaster replace Jacob Duvall? I mean, he was everything for Lancaster last year. 1,100 yards passing, 1,200 yards rushing, 16 rushing touchdowns. When they needed a yard, 7 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards, Jacob Duvall got it for them. So it's going to be interesting to see who they have to replace him. But they do return a lot of experience on the offensive and defensive lines.
Yeah, Shark, Lancaster, Jacob Dival, a must-see player in the SWC. He was really fun to watch last year. That's a big hole that Lancaster has to fill. What are some of the other areas with the Flying Arrows that you're looking at this season?
Well, at the quarterback position, I don't think that you're going to be able to replicate that in particular. Dival was a special athlete. In fact, he began his high school career in football as a running back, and then Coach John Hoke moved him to quarterback, and instantly you had even better results as far as moving the football. He was a type of kid. He was built a little bit like a fullback, but he had the arm of a quarterback, and he had that special ability where he can gain those yards that you need. Like Tom was saying, you need 2 yards, he'd get it. You need 7, he'd get it. You need 12, he would get it. But he was also dinged up a little bit last year. And finally, their luck ran out against Kenosha St. Joseph. And St. Joseph's was a very, very good team last year and took the Arrows out at the end of the season, 35-6. Now, we mentioned Prairie du Chien in the conference. Without knowing a whole lot about the personnel this year, I don't think anything's really going to change there with Prairie du Chien. They've got a tradition of being head of the class when it comes to the SWC. I tell you what, that Broadhead Judah team, I guess, returned some really good players. And then watch out for River Valley. Yes, they started out very slow last year. They were 0-6. They played Lancaster on homecoming night, and that was the elixir. They just had this great spark that night against Lancaster, won that game. In fact, they got to the point where they did make the playoffs last year. They got to level 2, but they lost to who else but Prairie du Chien, 52-15. So keep an eye out on River Valley. However, I was just looking over the WIS Sports look at the teams, or at least a few of the teams out of the SWC. River Valley, I think, because of the slow start last year, I think that was probably in the as a result of Coach Eastlick stepping down only a few weeks before the season began, and then they turned to a co-coaching situation, Dan Makovic and Chad Maxwell. Now, this year, they're not listed in the coach's box. So I don't know if there's another change there, or maybe it's going to involve just simply one of the coaches taking over as a head coach. I don't know what the situation is there. But with them winning enough games to make the playoffs last year and playing a playoff game, I got to believe that's providing the impetus to get that River Valley team back on the winning track because, well, that's what they're kind of used to in the SWC. And as far as Lancaster, getting back to Lancaster, if they can develop a quarterback that can operate that offense where the running backs and the quarterbacks kind of complement each other, running the football, I think they'll be in good shape. I don't think they have to necessarily become arrows with their offense, but it would help if they can pass the football in key situations. That's something that Jacob Dieball had a little bit of trouble with early on, but then he ironed that out. So if anybody takes over that position, then they will have to move the football with their legs and passing the football with at least some degree of success.
A couple players I wanted to talk about. One at Prairie du Chien, Tyler Wagner, who rushed for 1,200 yards and 17 touchdowns. He's on the Elroy Hirsch list, preseason list. And a guy, Shark, that jumped out of nowhere last year for Lancaster, Peyton Alvarado, 921 yards rushing with 10 touchdowns. He's also on the Hirsch list. And maybe their quarterback will be Nolan Wolf. He threw 49 passes last year, completed 23. Wally already mentioned they have a scrimmage on Friday. I hope to go to that and learn maybe a little bit more about Lancaster this year, but they always seem to be able to piece things together.
Yeah, Tom, Peyton Alvarado, that's one of those situations that you just don't take anyone for granted. Alvarado, he kind of showed up big in a blowout win over Parkview Albany. He came in the second half wearing, I think, number 90 and ran the football all over the place. And that was just a chance for him to get his feet wet to be able to contribute greatly to his team last year. So, yeah, those kids, those sophomores who come into those blowout wins and in some cases blowout losses, don't underestimate them. That's just a platform for them to really show their stuff and show that they truly belong.
I don't disagree with you at all. I mean, that's one of the things that you always look for is that kid that steps in where you didn't expect necessarily that he was going to be able to do something. And again, we're looking at a player there that now we're looking at him as being a one of the leaders coming into this year for Lancaster. But as I look around the conference and I look at where WIS Sports has Platteville pictured, they've got them down at 5th. What did they lose from last year? They lost a quarterback.
I can tell you they
lost
lost
an excellent lineman. They got almost everyone else back. We're looking at them being down in the conference. Now, they got some pretty good kids there. And I don't expect to see them finishing in 5th place. I don't know where they'll finish. They're not going to win the league. They're not going to beat Broadhead Judah. But I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up and knocked some of those guys ahead of them down a notch or two. I wouldn't be shocked at all. Plus the fact that your rookie head coach is no longer a rookie head coach. And that also makes a difference. So we got some things that'll be happening there. And there is excitement. Yeah, they're all goofed up right now where they have to go to the middle school and practice because they don't have their normal practice field, and all of that's gone. But there's some excitement amongst the kids and amongst the parents and so on about the new field that they're going to be on. And they're saying hopefully at the end of the season. So there could be something a little bit more that will happen coming out of Platteville.
Yeah, Steve, the Hillman got into the postseason last year. They did lose to Lodi in the level 1 playoff, but you have to think, with a rookie head coach, getting the team into the postseason is a big win. They finish playing at Pioneer Stadium this year with the new stadium. Hopefully by the end of this year, they'll have their homecoming game there. But, as Wally mentioned, there's got to be some optimism within that Hillman locker room that this team can make some noise in the SWC.
Definitely. There's, when you only lose 3 or 4 seniors to graduation, unless everybody just fails to improve from one year to the next, you have to be optimistic. Now, the 2 players that didn't come back because of graduation, they're going to be tough to replace. Derek Digman, 3-year starter, quarterback, tough kid. He would try to do whatever it was that was needed. If they needed to throw, to move the ball, he would. I recall there was a game last year where the pass game wasn't working at all. And so they had to run the ball almost entirely in the second half. And he wasn't 100%, but was still running the ball and getting first downs and so on. I think everybody on the Platteville sideline was like holding their breath when he was running, but he was still willing to do that. The other guy that is going to be difficult to replace is Porter Vanderano. He was a big part of both offensive and defensive lines. Literally, he was the biggest kid out there. Started at center, started at nose tackle. So those 2 guys are going to be tough to replace, but nearly everybody else is back. And I think a 5th place finish would be, frankly, very disappointing. Andrew Troxel, the Richland Center coach, was quoted last week as saying he thought that Platteville's probably one of the top 3 teams in the SWC. Along with, I think, as everybody else feels, Broadhead Judah and Prairie du Chien. And I have to agree with that. I think that when you look at this season, the funny part about it is that they could be a much better team than last year, and it won't necessarily show up in the record because Lancaster is ranked. Prairie du Chien is 3rd in Division 5. Broadhead Judah is ranked. And Lancaster, I think, is ranked 15th, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, everybody thinks River Valley, might pick up where they left off last year. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but it's a difficult conference. And as far as Platteville's non-conference goes, they're playing Darlington and Mineral Point, and it would be difficult. I mean, Prairie apparently has got the big time non-conference schedule also, but I'm not sure you can come up with a more difficult pair of non-conference opponents than Darlington and Mineral Point. So the Hillman could start the conference season 0-2 and be a better team than they were last year, and then still, after that, make some noise in the SWC. And I have to think that they're going to do that.
Well, you take a look also at the scrimmage they have coming up, where they're lining up against Elkhorn, Milwaukee, Bradley Tech, and Waterloo. Well, Waterloo isn't exactly a pushover, and let's face it, Elkhorn has had some problems lately, and so has Bradley Tech. But still, I mean, you're lining up against a decent Waterloo team there, and these other 2. It's giving you your couple of young kids, your new center and your new quarterback, a chance to shine a little bit, perhaps in the scrimmage, and build some confidence. And really, that's what they need is confidence.
They need reps and confidence that they can get the job done. I think including Bradley Tech in there is interesting because I don't know what kind of football team they are, but they're a big school, and Platteville is a big school, over 500 enrollment now, biggest in the area. I think one thing that scrimmage might really help in is showing what kind of depth that they have. The last 2 seasons, they've kind of faded at the end of the season, which was why their playoff berth was where it was and why there was a few hours of question whether they were going to make the playoffs because they lost their last regular season game the last 2 seasons. In Division 7, depth is not an issue because nobody's got any depth. Everybody is playing both ways and they're playing on special teams. But when you get to the bigger schools, Platteville size, and you're playing somebody in the postseason like Lodi or Madison Edgewood or someone like that, you need to have a lot of guys who can contribute because, as happened last year when players got hurt, well, now you've lost starters on both sides of the ball. And Platteville's had numbers issues kind of until last year. So I have to think that depth is still a question mark, and that's going to determine, I think, how far Platteville is going to be able to go in the postseason, assuming they get there.
Looking at their practice the other day, and again, I wasn't over there getting right in the middle of anything, but it appears as though their numbers are up a little bit. And that's going to make a big deal again with that size school of being able to compete with everyone else. If they got more numbers, better chance again for depth.
Definitely.
Yes, the other 2 teams we haven't talked about too much is Dodgeville and Richland Center. And Scott, I'm looking at what Dodgeville did last year. It was either they were blowing teams out or they were getting blown out. It was kind of, hit or miss, with them. And then Richland Center got blown out pretty much the entirety of their season, a 1-8 record. What do you make of those 2 teams, Scott? Do you think Dodgeville, do you think that they have a chance to kind of play more consistent and maybe make some noise in the SWC?
Well, with a new coach last year and really the limited of the players, I mean, I don't think there was more than 30 kids out as a whole team. They had some pretty good seniors that were able to play the game, that a lot of them played. And my last year coaching on JV, we were undefeated. So a lot of those kids, had the taste of winning. They're kind of rebuilding this year. They have some kids coming back. But when you look at the league, it's going to come down to Broadhead and Perdishing. Whoever wins that game will be the conference champ. I think after that, it's going to be everybody else fighting for that playoff spot, beating everybody else up. And your dark horses could be Platteville and Lancaster. Valley has lost a couple good players. So the lower tier, they're good enough to beat people on any given night. You just have to be ready. And, that playoff spot is very vital.
Yeah, the playoff spot is vital. One reason is every step you take in the playoff path is another week of practice. And that probably doesn't benefit the seniors so much, but it does benefit everybody else. And people tend to forget that. Programs have momentum, both positive and negative momentum. And if you look at, I hate to use that as an example with Dodgeville, they haven't made the playoffs in 10 years. So they've had, once the season starts, 9 weeks of practice, and that's it. You look at a team like Darlington, they're going up to level 4 every season. Somebody like Broadhead Judah, level 2 or 3, and so on. Well, they've had, in the case of Darlington, 4 extra weeks of practice for the last couple of seasons. And that, I think, has a lot to do with how, they got all these guys they have to replace, but it doesn't look like that when the season gets started, because those non-seniors last season got all of the extra reps in practice because they were practicing for postseason games. So that's one of the reasons why these teams seem to be always up at the top, because they're practicing it, longer than other teams are. So I think Lombardi said winning is a habit. Unfortunately, so is losing. And I'm not going to put it exactly that way in high school, but programs do have momentum. Winning is a momentum thing, and unfortunately not winning is a momentum thing also.
One of the things I think you take a look at, and I don't care which league you're talking about. And if you turn around and you look at all of the leagues in our area, consistently you'll see the same teams up near the top. The other thing you'll see consistently is they have the same coaching staff year after year after year. Turnover in staff hurts. Not just the head coach, but the staff in general. And if you turn over, say, 2 or 3 of your assistant coaches and you lose your head coach, that next year, unless you're really loaded with talent, you're not going to do well. And I mean, I've seen this over the years. Over the years, who's been the team to beat? Whether it was the Southern 8, whether it was the SWAL for a while, and then it was the SWC, year in and year out, it was Platteville. Platteville was a team to beat. Why? Because the coaching staff stayed together for over 25 years. Yeah, you had some other things going on, but that was the key. Darlington, over the years, they've always been good. How has the coaching staff changed much? Not a whole lot. We've seen some head coaches come and go, but they were there for a while and they built. And then they had assistant coaches who were still there afterwards, and it was still built. And I don't care where you go. Lancaster, took John Hoke a while to get himself up and going, but once it got going and he got a staff built and they stayed together, they kept winning. That's what it takes. I don't care which league it is or whatever. What's happening in Potosi now? Same coaches. They're doing the right things. They're getting numbers and they're winning. That's what it takes.
Culture matters. Culture
matters.
Well, and I think what Wally said about Potosi Castle is a perfect example of that, because they've had coaches who are there for a long time, but Potosi Castle, there are expectations not just of how you play on how you perform on the field, but it feels to me like Potosi Castle is really the most consistent program that there is in the Six Rivers for a long time. They are always going to be competitive. They are always going to play physical. They're always going to have skilled guys out there. And Mark Siegert has done just a fantastic job. He sometimes is a little apologetic for how things got started, but I got here in 2012, and that was the year that Potosi got to state. And every year they are a contender for the Six Rivers title, regardless of how many kids they have graduate. That's the kind of the amazing thing about that team, is they have these great players graduate, just plug in new guys and go. That's basically what they do.
We're starting to see that starting to grow a little bit in River Ridge right now, because Wade's had some good kids and they've started to win, and now it's building, and I think that's going to continue at Ridge for a while.
Grow your business by enhancing your digital marketing efforts with QueenB Radio and Phase 3 Digital. We provide customized solutions based on your business's unique needs, including targeted advertising, website development, and search engine optimization. Contact us at 608-349-2000 or visit p3da.com/Platteville to learn more.
We're talking about the SWAL conference now. The Cuba City Cubans are a team that we'll be following on Super Hits 106 throughout the season. Josh Wiederholtz, your thoughts on the SWAL as a whole? What are some of the storylines that you're looking for as the season begins?
I guess kind of the way I see it is a kind of two-tiered system this year. We'll see how it plays out. Darlington comes in ranked third in the state, and they're the king, and they're the king until they get knocked off. They'll return 6 starters on offense. 5 of them are all conference. Their defense will really carry them. 9 returners on defense, 8 who are all conference, and also the 4 running backs with over 500 yards each returning. And then add on top of that, Joe Thomas Award watch list, Gage Banfield, offensive lineman. And yeah, they're looking big picture. They're looking to win their last game. And then you got Belleville, who in my opinion will be very tough. Their only losses last year, twice, were against Darlington. They do graduate a lot of skill positions, but their offensive line is coming back and they'll be extremely strong and have always had quite an explosive offense. And they're probably going to rely a little bit more on the run game this year, but I expect them in Darlington to kind of run away with it. And then after that, another big story will be who in the second tier between Mineral Point, Cuba City, and Fenimore is going to make the playoffs. And a lot of that depends. So this year, doing the two crossover games, against the Six Rivers teams, and those games will count against the conference record, and those will be really important games. Again, what Coach Leonard's doing in Mineral Point, they'll be another team that's very strong up front and at wideout and defensive back. Going back to the crossover games, they'll probably get sick of playing Winkers teams. Their crossover game is against River Ridge, and they'll be competing with Darlington in the regular season. And a really key game this year, there will be a Cuba City Mineral Point matchup, the last game of the season, and that could have some major playoff implications. And then Cuba City, we'll talk a little bit more about them later. They're kind of the opposite of Mineral Point. A lot of skill positions coming back and looking to get bigger and faster up front with their younger guys. And they have probably one of the more favorable crossover matchups. They get to play Peck Argyle, who was winless last year in their crossover game. And then there's always Fenimore, kind of a wild card. Young team coming off. Coach Rosemeyer is really looking to rebuild the program. A lot of young guys, a lot of wrestlers, and anything can happen, and you make a run, and you get to the playoffs, and then you start playing.
Yeah, Rob, you and I got to cover Cuba City quite a bit last year, and one of the things that stood out to me about that team is that their schedule was absolutely brutal. They finished with a 2-7 record, but a very deceptive 2-7 record. I think a lot of sophomores on that Cuba City squad, but there's some really good athletes on that team. There's players that are now juniors that played pivotal roles in that Cuba City State Championship baseball team that are now going to be asked to step up and make a move in the conference. What stood out to you about Cuba City last year, and what are the things you're looking for heading into this 2023 campaign?
Yeah, Josh hit on one of the things, which is when it comes to offense, Cuba City's skill positions are loaded. They lost one skill position player, one that was a starter last year. So everybody else is back. Quarterback, both running backs, tight end, one of the wide receivers, all returning starters from a year ago. And as you said, Tyler, several of these were sophomores, so they're now going to be juniors, including their quarterback, which means they'll be around at least for 2 more years. So Cuba City has that feel of a team that is going to, I think, take a pretty big leap this year, and then maybe next year an even bigger leap, because they have a lot of talent at the skill position. The weakness would be along the offensive line. They are losing 3 of the 5 starters that graduated on the O-line, so that's a concern, obviously. And then on defense, they're losing 5 of 11 starting defenders, and those were at each level, a couple D linemen, a couple linebackers, a couple in the secondary. So, the defense is going to have to retool a bit. But as far as offense, it makes you think if they can at least block halfway decent, this team should put up points. And, that it ought to be a fun ride in my eyes. That's the way I'm looking at it. As Cuba City might be one of these fun teams to watch offensively. And now defensively, again, can they get the job done? They also, though, have had that seasoned coach in Guy Kopp, winning record overall, 88-63 career record at Cuba City. He's a continual winner. Last year was an anomaly, going 2-7. And as you said, Tyler, I mean, brutal schedule with a really young team. So you'll take your lumps for a year, but I think Cuba City is going to be right back in the mix this year, and as Josh said, there is that elite tier of the SWAL, Darlington, Belleville. I think Belleville may drop off a little more, but we'll see. But Cuba City right behind them, and Mineral Point too. So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. But if I had to guess, Cuba City is going to be a fun team to watch this year, and I would think probably is going to be a good offensive team.
I had a talk with Coach Kopp this last year a couple of times, and after the season, he's real optimistic. And when you talk about their offensive line and concern about some of their blocking and all of that with the guys that they lost, he said, we're going to be so much faster. He said, we were pretty slow up front last year. but he said, we're going to be a lot faster. And I think we're going to have a better offensive line than what people think. And if you add that with what he's got for skilled kids, offensively, like you said, Rob, they're going to really do some domination along the line. Defense is where they're going to have the biggest question, but at the same token, one of the things that Cuba City has that not everyone has, they have numbers. They'll find kids to play because they have numbers.
Absolutely. And Cuba City, one of the coolest matchups of the year, they have their crossover game against Potosi Castle. That's going to be one heck of a football game in the middle of the season. That is going to be an awesome game. We'll have that on Super Hits 106 during the season. Let's talk about Darlington for a minute. Shark, you've gotten a call. Their last two postseason runs, they made it to level 4, start the preseason number 3, according to wisports.net. Does Darlington have what it takes to get over the hump, and what are the things that they have to do to get past that level 4 and into the state title game?
Well, in the case of the level 4 games, it was 2 of the last 3 years. And those 2 of the last 3 years, they started the season with a loss to Fond du Lac St. Mary Springs, and they ended the season at level 4 against Fond du Lac St. Mary Springs. So that's the boundary right there that for Darlington as far as kicking the door open and getting to a state title game. That and some nagging injuries. They've been befuddled by those the last couple of years, including the COVID year. So those are the 2 things that have stopped Darlington: the Ledgers and some nagging injuries. Now last year they met Mondovi in the level 4 playoff game, a cold night at Wisconsin Dells. A game in which Mondovi really didn't do anything in that game. Darlington was up 7-0, then it was 7-7, and it stayed that way for a long time. And then finally, Mondovi got their hands on the football. They marched down the field, scored a touchdown late. Darlington then turned the ball over, and it was the Mondovi Buffaloes who went on to the state tournament. So if Darlington can just simply stay healthy, and in the losses to Fond du Lac St. Mary Springs, I got to preface that a little bit, that it was 2 years ago, that loss in a playoff game at DeForest. Darlington went for it on 4th and 2, 4th and 3, 4th and 4 in the second half of that game. They took a 24-0 lead shortly before halftime. Springs got a touchdown, made it 24-7. And then in the second half of that game, Darlington faced those 4th downs and just couldn't convert any of them. Had they converted any of those with the running game that they had, but they were nicked up, and they didn't convert those, and Springs got good field position and took advantage of that. So I think just a better execution in some crucial situations, and that's due. They're due for it. So I think that they could knock the door down for that. And I'm sure, obviously, all the polls are going to show that they're going to be right there this year. They got a lot of depth, and they got a lot of returning players, really at just about every position, except for quarterback. But the quarterback can rely on the ground game and not rely on the passing game all so much. So, yeah, I think it's going to be good for Darlington, what they can possibly do this year. And as far as challengers, Mineral Point could possibly challenge. If I'm Mineral Point, I got an outstanding quarterback in Eli Lindsay. Now, he shared some time at QB last year, but I got to believe that's his position and position to lose. You got a kid like that, that's that big at 6'6". He can run and he can throw. And you rely on a kid like that you got a terrific athlete at quarterback, the most important position on the field. I think Mineral Point's going to surprise some people this year.
Yeah, Mineral Point, a preseason number 11 team in the state. And Tom, I know you love Darlington. You were talking about the returners they have. I mean, that's a pretty stacked lineup that comes back.
Yeah, Shark hit on it. Their running game, they had 4 backs that combined for almost 2,000 yards and 32 touchdowns. But I think he also hit on something else, which I maybe would push back on Shark just a little bit. The quarterback can rely on the running game, but I think one of the reasons why they've gone out in the playoffs, they've got to throw the football better at times, when defenses stack up against them. So I think who their quarterback is next year or this year, I think that's going to be a huge point for them. I'm sure they're going to find somebody. They got a lot of good athletes, and you got a 6'6" Will Murray sitting in the middle of the field who's a really good target, when you got to go to him. So I really like Darlington in the SWAL.
And Tom, you do make a good point about that quarterback position, because Braden Davis, he used his legs a lot last year. So yes, they had the 4 running backs all together, and the sum of the parts were really good. You don't have to have a 2,000-yard rusher to be successful. In their case, they had 4 roughly 500-yard rushers, but you also had Braden Davis, who used his legs. He was a decent thrower, but if they have somebody that can also throw the football to Murray, they're going to be really dangerous.
If you look back traditionally, Darlington is not the team that wants to throw the football. Traditionally, they have not thrown the ball. They're been a running team. I mean, we go all the way back. Oh, Craven, we can go all the way back to Wadsey, can't we? And
Yeah.
what they wanted to do, run the football. Belly play, trap play. That was their bread and butter. And they've made good use of it all the way along. And they're still making use of that type of a running attack. But I agree, and I'm looking back to that game up at the Dells last year, Shark. Had they been able to put the ball in the air, it was their game. But they just didn't have that ability last year. They need to have it this year, I think, to get over the hump.
And one final thought on the SWAL. We didn't talk about this team at all. In the final year that they're in this conference, Parkview Albany has yet to win a conference game in the SWAL. I wouldn't mind seeing them win one, on their way out before the realignment comes in. I'm not really a fan of seeing teams get, completely pummeled by tough competition, but the SWAL has been a tough conference. There's a lot of great teams and a lot of great athletes. I would love to see Parkview Albany get at least one before going out and use that as something that can help their program going forward. Because if there's a team that's taken their bumps quite a bit, that's a team that's kind of the proverbial one to root for. Get them their one before they get out of the conference.
I think my final thought on really the SWAL is it comes back down to one thing: physicality. I think for the size of the school, the SWAL is one of the most physical conferences from top to bottom that you'll find in the state. The weakest one when it comes to being physical is Parkview Albany. They are nowhere near as physical as any of the other teams above it. Even Southwestern can be pretty doggone physical when they make up their mind to it. And we know that Belleville and Cuba City and Darlington and Fenimore, they're physical. There's no getting around it. But
and really nothing has changed that much, Wally, because you remember when the SWAL used to be the old Southern 8, and you had the Dodgevilles, and you had Mount Horeb, and you had Platteville in that conference, and those schools, year in and year out, they're physical too.
Agreed.
This one-on-one with the Great One interview is presented by People's State Bank.
Looking for a checking account with no monthly requirements or service charge? People's State Bank's People's Checking Account is just what you're looking for. This account includes free debit card, online and mobile banking, bill pay, and much more at no cost to you. You heard that right. No cost to you. We're your local community bank ready to serve you. People's State Bank, member FDIC.
Welcome to the People's State Bank one-on-one with a Great One. This week we have Cuba City football coach, track coach, and tech ed instructor Guy Kopp with us. Thanks for joining us, Coach.
Well, I appreciate you asking me to be part of this future fantastic program.
You are the first Great One. No pressure.
I'm not getting sick of hearing that too often.
So, you already have a pretty storied coaching career with many accolades, over 100 wins, well over 100 wins with the Cubans, Green Bay Packers Coach of the Week winner, coach of the WFCA All-Star Game, even teaching awards like the Inspire Award from the Wisconsin Tech Ed Association. In order to have that kind of longevity and just that passion, you kind of have to love what you do. So would you mind explaining kind of what first got you into coaching and then what brought you to Cuba City?
Well, what first got me into coaching is what got me into college, playing the game of football that I love. My high school coach was an awesome guy. In fact, he is still living. You know, he gave me the aspiration that I could go on and play at the next level. So I picked UW Stout, and, you know, not just because I'm going to be honest with you, I was going to be a tradesman. I was going to be a sheet metal worker and work the trades. And Stout was the only college that didn't require an ACT. Never took the ACT. So I always tell the kids I never got anything wrong on the ACT. So
Perfect.
you know, and so that led me to Stout. I did look at UW Platteville, but once again, it was kind of late to try to see what you could get on the ACT. So I went to Stout and had a pretty successful 4 years, lettered for all 4 years. And I was ready to get out, and I was ready done with school, and I was going to go back and be a sheet metal worker, work for my dad and uncle. And my aunt caught wind of it, who was my guidance counselor in high school. And I think she called the head coach and said, "Hey, you need to keep him there until he graduates." And they said, "How do we do that?" And I think she honestly turned around and helped the coach pay for my last year of college. And basically I was a grad assistant, and no other grad assistant got paid up there. So, you know, I think there was some swingling going on, and it was awesome. And then Cuba City one day called me when I was student teaching, a guy named John Doyle. Once again, he's still living. I've been sitting next to him at the Badger games for the past 31 years. And he called me and said, "We got tech ed, football, and track job opening. Would you be interested?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd be interested." And he said a few more words, and I said, "What are you, like the head football coach?" He goes, "No, I'm the principal." I'm like, "Huh, no kidding." No kidding. So I never called him back. And then called me 2 weeks later, and needless to say, he had an interview set up. And I said, "Well, you can't set that interview up, Dad. That's my spring break. I'm going to head back up to Stout." He says, "Oh, you can interview first." Interviewed, fell in love with the town, fell in love with the people that I met. Quite different from where I'm from. My high school is bigger than the town of Cuba City. And that was one of the interview questions. And I still remember answering, and I said, "I think it would be pretty cool. I'd know everybody in the town." And I'll be honest with you, it's pretty much true. You do know everybody. In fact, I was so young when I got hired. I was 22 years old. And needless to say, people think I graduated from Cuba City. And I'm like, "No, I'm actually from Milwaukee." But that's how I got in. If it wasn't for John Doyle, Jim Metztroff hired me as a freshman coach. I was a D coordinator, worked with Kevin Kunkel. And Kevin Kunkel was same age as I was, very energetic guy. He's principal up in somewhere in Illinois, and had a great coaching career, coached with Jeff Pastine in basketball. So he had the intensity. He taught me how to bring that to the kids. And needless to say, it was the right move for me. And I was here for 7 years, and I left, and because I always wanted to be a head coach. So I moved to Prairie du Chien, did that, and then moved back, because, you know, it's kind of your first love, and you know what you had there, and you wanted to continue and just be that route. But like I said, if it wasn't for football, I'd never went to college. If it wasn't for football, I'd never been a teacher or a coach, and I don't regret any of my decisions I ever made. I would have never met my wife and have 4 beautiful kids, you know. So it all worked out great for me.
All because of a game.
All because of a game, right?
Yeah, that's so awesome. So speaking of kind of the dedication and love for the game, a lot of people don't really realize, especially at this level, how much actual time goes into running a football program that isn't, you know, your full-time job, like you're down in Texas or something. So kind of, what is it like being a teacher and a coach at Cuba City? And now that your kids are done, do you find it easier or harder, or does that change the dynamic at all?
You know, I have 3 girls, so the only time I coached them was coached the girls were in track.
Okay.
And track is the easiest sport to coach. And I'm a throws coach. The one that throws farther throws. The one that throws, you know, all that runs faster runs. So there is no you know, it's not what I feel or why they got their accolades. It's just they're good. They're good at what they do.
Absolutely.
You know, I've always been proud. All my kids were successful throwers. You know, you got 2 of them hold, you know, the school record, and you had a couple, you know, have them all at state. It's beautiful. That I like. But, you know, when you get to football, it's subjective. It's what I see. You know, my kid was a quarterback. A lot of times all of his accolades are because his dad's a head coach, you know. But people don't understand, when you're a coach, you work with your kid at that sport. There's great baseball players around here. Well, their dads all played baseball. There's great wrestlers around here. Their dads are all wrestlers. Well, I've been a football coach for 30 years. I get to coach my son. Should he be better than everybody? I would hope so, because he's been around it the longest, and that's what happens. Is it easier coaching football without coaching your own kid? Absolutely. Because you're not worried what other people are thinking. You're not worried if someone else gets, is he getting those more treatment, or is he getting better treatment? Is he this position because dad's a coach? But yeah, that route, love coaching my kids. I wouldn't change that for the world. That's why you do coach. People often thought, hey, Bo's done, so will Coach Kopp. He'll be done. No, I'm still coaching. But I hope that answered your question a little bit there. Kind of went off the tangent.
No, absolutely. And that's awesome. And that's kind of all about, like you were talking about, just being part of the community. And that's what makes it great at this level. And I really do think, after living other places, that we have something special going on in this part of the state.
Absolutely. And you really appreciate the people that stick around your town. I'm coaching kids now that I coached their dad, and even if I didn't coach their dad, I taught their dad. And you're sitting there and you remember growing up the same scenario, but you were the player. And the coach is like, I coached your dad. And you're thinking, wow, this guy's old. He coached his dad. And, sometimes you feel that way. And, when you're in a young community, you got to surround yourself with great young coaches. And that's one thing we're blessed at Cuba City. If you look at me right now, I have Coach Graber. He's a history teacher. I got Coach Young. He is a Phi Ed teacher. I got Coach Rogeman. He's a math teacher. So we got them in all areas. That really helps get kids out for football. Yeah. And the relationships that these coaches get with them in the classroom. I mean, it's nice to get volunteers, but being in the classroom is something special.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Kind of speaking of coaching, so, throughout the years, you learn some coach speak and pick up some cliches. My favorite from my high school coach was always be the hammer, not the nail.
Yeah, heard that one.
Do you have a favorite one that you've heard over the years?
Yeah, I do. And it actually comes from Coach Graber, my offensive coordinator. And I love it. I mean, he's been saying it for years, very successful, won a state title in baseball. Own where your feet are.
I like
own where your feet are. And I use that too. And I always say, like Coach Graber says, own where your feet are. It makes so much sense. Hey, you're here. Take ownership of that. You're in baseball. Take ownership, it just hits all the sports. It's not the football cliche you're looking for, but I just love that saying that he always has said. And that's why I use it, and kids understand it. It's pretty simple, and it's not bad. I mean, I don't know. I like yours too. Be the hammer, not the nail.
The one that Coach Eager came up with that I stole, that doesn't really apply to all life situations quite as well as yours.
I tell you what, Coach Eager, right? That was at Fenimore.
Yep.
Small world, taking my daughter to Whitewater. Who's there helping out with financial? What a great coach, fantastic coach, And he remembered me and, the relationships we built, and he took me right in with my daughter and explained how to work. We're new to it. And he's like, no, you got to do this. I'm like, wow, I thought you were just a football coach. You really know what you're doing.
All because of a game.
All because of a game.
It leads right into my next question. So you build a lot of relationships being coached in a small town and a teacher, and you have a lot of special moments, living, working, and coaching in a community like Cuba City. What do you find most rewarding in general? And then if you have any specific moments?
Just the relationships you build and the contacts that you create and how they keep coming back. I mean, I could go on and on and on about the relationships you build over the years. I remember Burbeck kid, he's a very big carpenter or construction worker. And he says, I come down once every 2 years and hire Platteville kids. If you got someone from Cuba City that needs a job, I'll hire him in a heartbeat. Knowing that he has that much faith in me. But like I said, the biggest thing why you coach, building the relationships. I got a phone call today. Tim Surjak coaches at Broadhead. We talk all the time. He was one of the last guys I got into tech ed to be a teacher. I remember my first one was Ed Wigman, and he's a college professor at Platteville. And we still talk. We go to conventions together, and here I was their teacher. I was their teacher. But probably the most memorable moment, I'm the teacher, and everybody else in my family are lawyers and all that good stuff. I'm just a teacher. And my brother came down from Minnesota, and we're just sitting out my driveway having a bonfire, reminiscing about our old times. We're 11 months apart. He got the brains, I got the good looks. But anyways, we were sitting in the driveway and having a bonfire, and I said, in about a half hour, people's going to see me out in my driveway. We're going to have people out here. And it wasn't less than half hour. I probably had 25 former players sitting there talking. They bring their own chairs and just talking, having a good time. When they left, my brother says, I might make a lot more money than you, but today what happened, you can't put a price tag on that. These kids want to be by. He goes, I don't get that. I sit out my driveway. I'd be lucky if a car beeps the horn at me. He said, so that was pretty cool. And that always stuck with me. And that happened about 7 years ago, but you
So
still remember that.
Yeah. And now
something you take for granted. Myself, kids coming over, stopping over that you taught. To my brother, that was something special, and you just take it for granted, because it does happen, and that meant a lot to me. And like I said, I love every kid I coached, and I love every kid I taught, and if they ever need anything, I'll be there for them.
That's what makes small towns fantastic, and yeah, it's awesome. We will move on to football a little bit now.
Well, one other thing, real quick, before we move on to that, and it leads up to this, you're not in this profession for as long as you are if you don't have an understanding wife.
That's good point.
Because like you said, it's a part-time job, but the time you put in is a full-time job. If you don't have an understanding wife, you're not going to be doing it.
Yeah.
And I've been with a lot of coaches, because a lot of them, when you first start out, say, you didn't marry a coach's wife. Well, I had 4 kids. I got to go home. I got to go home. She's home with 4 young kids, and she was a trooper, and now she looks at me, and I know she's like, well, when you giving it up? But she never asked. I know she always thinks it, but now we can go on to the ball. I had to mention her, that.
No, it's kind of like one of those things where people say everyone should work service industry in their life for like a year. Well, anyone that complains about coaches should coach for a year and then see what they think. So scrimmages are over now and getting ready for the regular season. You guys just finished up Friday at River Valley. As a head coach, what do you kind of look to get out of the scrimmage every year?
Participation, the first thing. All these kids, and I got a lot of kids out. You want to make sure every kid gets into the scrimmage. One, so you got proper way to evaluate them. And 2, so they understand what they need to work on to see the field on Friday nights. When you have as many kids as we do out, 15 plays on offense, 15 plays on defense against one team, 15 plays on offense, 15 plays on defense, you get 30 plays. But when you got, for instance, 7 inside linebackers and you're running a 4-3, you're not getting many plays to get evaluated. So you got to make sure kids understand it's not about how many plays you get, it's what you do when you get that chance. And that's the same thing on Friday night. You might only get 1 or 2 chances to get in there, but make it positive. So you try to teach that. Big other thing is walk away healthy. Walk away healthy from a scrimmage. And
always huge.
All the texts you get out there throughout coming home Friday on the bus, be healthy. No one asks how you did. Are you healthy? Yep, got away healthy. Well, that's a positive,
But they don't keep score on those for a reason. So
I have never won a scrimmage.
Undefeated though.
Undefeated, but like I said, that's what we look at it. We really want to get the kids because come season time, these kids are not going to get as much time as they feel they should get, and parents might see the same thing. But long as you can explain to them, this is why. Hopefully they understand. But hey, I've been in both parts. I've been on both sides of the ball. Our vision is this big when it's our kids, and it's this big when it's not yours. So, but that's what we look at, and we accomplished that goal from the scrimmage, and we were very happy and pleased the way we played.
Awesome.
To be honest with you, we had defense created more turnovers than the offensive had turnovers. So that's always a nice thing.
That's a good day.
Yeah, good day.
Win a lot of football games that way.
Absolutely.
So, you start the season off with non-conference games against Benton, Scales Mountain, Shullsburg at home, and then away at Lancaster before starting the conference crossover games. What are your expectations for the Cubans this year, both in the conference and overall, and how do you kind of see the season shaking out?
Be more competitive than we were last year. Everybody says we were young. No, we graduated a lot the year before. We weren't really young. We had a good group of senior guys. It's just that these senior guys had to play with a lot of younger guys. So, going into the season, we just want to be better and more fundamentally sound than the previous year. And by doing that, it should create more wins for the team.
Mm-hmm.
We want to get better every week. I don't want to use every week, the old Badger 1-0, 1-0. No, we just want to get better every week.
Yep.
Non-conference games are great. But you still want to play well. You still want to win the game. You don't want to take on a cupcake where you feel that, when you come home and you're watching film and saying, hey, are we that good or is this team that bad? And I don't think our non-conference schedule does that for us. I think our non-conference schedule says, hey, if we win, we beat a good team. If we lost to a good team. But this is what we need to improve on. You always want to have ways to improve, win or lose.
Yep.
Because if you get stagnant, come down week 8, you're not going to know how to make adjustments and be able to come over how do I want to say? You want to come over anything that's thrown at you.
Yep.
So that's what we're looking for there.
Definitely all about hitting your stride at the right time.
Yep. I do like our non-conference schedule. We play Benton, Benton, Scales Mountain, Shullsburg to try out. They beat us last year pretty handedly. So we're coming in focused. I don't care what you graduate. I don't care who you have coming back. They're well coached. They always have been. They're very competitive in their conference, and they proved that last year, and they're going to continue to be that way. Lancaster's Lancaster. If anybody, I coach track for one reason. I ref basketball for one reason, to scout opponents.
Sure.
So I'm off for track. If anybody thinks Lancaster ain't going to have a team, well, they didn't obviously watch the track season. And It's kind of like the old Lancaster. Their football coaches are all coaching track. And They got speed and they got athletes.
Absolutely.
So that's why we love choosing Lancaster and Benton for our non-conference games. As far as how the conference shakes out, if you don't mention the word Darlington, obviously you have never lived in this part of the state
Right.
and watched Redbird football. But does that mean we're going to lay down and get off the bus? No, that means we got to play every level. But that's just Darlington. You look at Fenimore. Fenimore has a fantastic, great head coach. Once again, you want to build relationships. I remember when Rosemeyer played. What a stud. Went to Madison, had a great high school career. Well, you know what? He did the right thing the way he did freshman. I forgot what it was called. Kind of like National Signing Day for the freshmen.
Yeah, I saw that. That was really cool.
And everybody's like, you got to do that. I'm like, why are you going to copy him? That was just a great idea, and he does a great job over there.
Mm-hmm.
And, go down the list with Justin Leonard. Justin Leonard from Mineral Point was on my staff for 1 year. Fantastic coach. I can't say, I didn't mention Winker's name. I went against him against Marcus Ann. Then he comes to Darlington. Great coach. And you got Joe from Parkview. What a winner. That guy's a winner. He might not won many games, but that guy knows how to talk to his team. He knows how to talk to everybody after the game. Hey, what's 3 things we can improve from this loss? Right after the game, I heard, I was like, oh, you pick up on stuff like that.
Yep.
Belleville, what a powerhouse. That guy does a fantastic job, and, you can never count them out because they got athletes coming everywhere. I know their numbers are low this year and they graduate a lot, but once again, they've been pretty good. I mean, we had their number for a couple times, but they had our number, and so that'll be a battle. So, if you look at the conference, you got Darlington, Belleville, you got Point, us, Fenimore, Parkview.
And
our crossover game is Peck Argyle.
Yeah, just an awesome conference all around. You got,
a
couple teams running pro style offenses, some running ground and pound. You got to kind of keep on your toes how you scheme each week.
Absolutely. You know, and like I said, the crossover games against Six River, you can't count those guys. We got Potosi.
Yep. Yeah.
Come on. You know,
Yep.
I always say, how come we always play in, you know, we played River Ridge when they were good. We played Potosi, you know, why do we always get the crossover games when they're the toughest ones in the conference coming back? And you know, Potosi with Steger always been a great job, and he's a fantastic coach, and he has a tradition going there. You know, he's just one division down from Darlington, but you look at what they have done over the past, they're a fantastic program too. And I hope people say that about us at Cuba City.
Absolutely. And I think they will coming into this season and beyond. And I appreciate your time. Thanks for talking with us a bit.
Well, I hope so too. I mean, sometimes I have the gift of gab, but you know, like I said, I'm going to take every opportunity to promote, 1, high school football, and promote 2, Cuba City football, and number 3, the surrounding conference, because I still think the SWAL is the best darn conference in Wisconsin, and we're competitive week in and week out. And just look at what we do when we get to the playoffs, when teams from our area get to the playoffs. We don't embarrass the SWAL.
Absolutely. Just got to get in and make a run.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Looking for a checking account with no monthly requirements or service charge? People's State Bank's People's Checking Account is just what you're looking for. This account includes free debit card, online and mobile banking, bill pay, and much more at no cost to you. You heard that right. No cost to you. We're your local community bank ready to serve you. People's State Bank. Member FDIC.
Talking about the Six Rivers Conference now, Tom Nisus, you and I got to call quite a few Six Rivers games last year following Potosi-Cassville and River Ridge. An outstanding game in their regular season matchup. We saw the teams advance to level 2 before being eliminated by their respective teams, and then Blackhawk Warren making it all the way to the level 3 playoff in Division 7. This conference has always had a reputation of being one of, if not the toughest conferences in Division 7. What do you make of the conference heading into 2023?
Well, it's kind of hard to tell. We're looking at paper right now, Ty, but I'll start with Potosi. I think you have to start there. 9-2 last year. Went out in a loss, as you said, at level 2 to Bangor, 20-0. Now they have some pieces to replace. Razoki, almost 1,400 yards passing, 14 touchdowns. They lose 2 big play perimeter athletes, the 2 Udahovens, who were both good on offense and also were really good defensive players in the secondary. But they do return Eli Adams, 1,300 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns, and Roman Friedrich, 950 yards and 11 touchdowns. Both are on the Elroy Hirsch list. That's got to be a good feeling for a coach to have your 2 starting running backs on a statewide watch list. They do return Braden Fishneck, 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. They return 19 letter winners and a 9-0 JV team. And I think that JV team had some size on it, because I was sitting on the bench during basketball last year and marveling how huge these Potosi kids were as sophomores. And I suspect a number of them are going to be playing football. So I think you have to start with them. And then you go right to River Ridge, 9-2 also. Lost to a really good Peppa Alma team, 45-34 on the road in level 2. Now they lose Braden Krubel, but they return some pretty good skilled people. Brady Bungie, Ricky Barita. Brandon Davis is a dual threat. He threw 5 touchdown passes, rushed for 2 more. But I think when you talk about Ridge, you start with quarterback Matthew Nice, 1,100 yards, over 1,100 yards passing, 16 passing touchdowns, rushed for almost 600 yards and 8 more touchdowns. And he's the only quarterback from our area on the Dave Craig preseason watch list. I didn't see anybody else. I might have missed somebody, but I did find him. His brother Andrew is a very good fullback, rushed for almost 1,000 yards last year and 14 touchdowns. He's kind of their bread and butter. Now they have a tough schedule this year. They play Wazeeka Seneca at home, Belleville at home, and then they're on the road at Mineral Point, and then they play Potosi on the road this year. So that's going to be a challenge for them. And before somebody else jumps in, let me give you my final 2 cents about the Six Rivers. Blackhawk has always been a preeminent power. And as you said, they made it to level 3 last year. But I'm not sure what's coming up, what's on their JV. They're quite a ways away from me here, but they lose 3 1,000-yard rushers and 39 touchdowns when Reed McNutt, Lucas Mills, and Landon Mahoney all graduated. Man, that's a lot of talent and production to graduate. I see the Six Rivers this year as a two-horse race, I think, between Potosi and River Ridge, with Southwestern and East Dubuque a dark horse who I don't know much about. You know, I saw him play last year, but I really don't know a lot about him. So, but it should be an interesting race in the Six Rivers.
Yeah, one of the great things about that conference over the last couple of years is that it's come down to those 3 teams at the very end, and they all had to play each other in the final 2 or 3 weeks of the season, kind of a round robin gauntlet, almost to decide the conference. That always makes for a fantastic finish. And you know, I kind of anticipate the same happening here, depending on what happens with Blackhawk. I expect that offensive line to be just as good. It's, you know, do you have the weapons at the skill positions to make up for that production that they lost through graduation? But, you know, there's other teams like Benton Scales Mount Schulzberg where, you know, they're a very respected team, a very respected program. Granted, they graduated quite a few players as well. Maybe one of those under the radar teams that, you know, they catch the right team on the right night, they factor into this conference too.
Well, that's one of the things I think I agree with completely with Benton Scales Mount Schulzberg. They're a real dark horse. They really are. And again, the scrimmage that'll be coming up here is going to tell a tale for them with Ithaca and Lancaster. And if they're competing at that level right away here with a scrimmage, then yes, they're going to compete right here in the Six Rivers very well.
And it's
yeah, one of the other. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I'm just going to say it's one of the fun things about covering high school sports, no matter the sport. Who emerges? You know, who will we be talking about next year that wasn't even on our radar this year? But they come out, they do something unbelievable, and here they are. I mean, that's the beauty of high school athletics. It's why we cover the games.
Yeah, Benton Scales. I was going to jump in. Benton Scales Mount Schulzberg last year. I had a chance to cover their game against Cuba City, and that was a game in which they kind of dominated. You know, they won, I think 48-20 was the final score. High octane, lots of offense from that team. The negative for them, and I think this was already mentioned, but is the number of starters that they're losing. In fact, they're losing every starting skill position player that they had, and 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen. So that's, you know, for them offensively, it's going to be a total retool for Benton Scales Mount Schulzberg. But maybe they have some really good, you know, JV players waiting in the wings.
Yep, and Josh, I want to talk to you about this one because Southwestern East Dubuque, you know, first year co-op last year, you don't really know what to expect when you have a co-op program to start out. I did cover a couple of their games last year, and one of the things that stood out to me is that this is a very scrappy team as far as their attitude and the way that they play. Mm-hmm. The issue is that they just kept getting in their own way. They had, you know, self-inflicted, you know, turnovers, some mistakes that just kind of come with the growing pains of, you know, maybe having younger players and just playing with players that you've never played with before. And I think the reason that they're so interesting this year is that because they don't have a playoff to qualify for. So every game this year is a playoff game for them, and they just might be out there to just completely wreck the conference and have enough motivation to catch, you know, one of those teams. Your thoughts on that? Because, you know, this is a program I know that you know quite well, and you know, this is a very intriguing team where, again, maybe not a dark horse, but definitely a team that you don't want to just keep under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you alluded to earlier, it seems like over the last, I mean, how many years, and I'm sure Southwestern East Dubuque fans will agree with me, that it's just the ball never seems to bounce the right way. And all it will take this year is for some of those turnovers and mistakes to go their way. I mean, the Warcats under Coach Edler, they're a physical team now, where they weren't necessarily in years past, and it's a great conference, but they're just not going to back down from anyone, and they could really affect the outcome if they pull a game somehow. Not even somehow, they're going to be competitive if they can pull a game for BSMS or a school like that, playing their old school brand of football and kind of grind the clock out, gives them a chance to win. Does that mean that they're going to try to contend for the conference title? Probably not. And then to top it off, their crossover schedule is Mineral Point and Darlington, which doesn't help. But again, they're not going to back down from those guys either. They're a new brand of football, and it's going to be exciting to watch those guys.
I chuckle when about a new brand of football at Southwestern, and I think over my years of being around, whether it's in Platteville or just doing radio or whatever, I have seen Southwestern school football being rebranded over and over and over and over again. And hey, I'll never forget the year that they played themselves on the carpet at Camp Randall. How they got there, I still don't know, except one good ball player. But really, this year, I don't see them doing anything that's going to bother the two teams at the top. But I see them being a real pain in the side of everyone else in the league, because they're going to come up and bite you in the behinder. Yeah, you can just see it coming. Who it'll be, I have no idea. But you know what? They're going to do it.
Yep, and I was part of one of those rebrands, as you put it, at Southwestern, my last coaching job. But no, absolutely. And like Coach Edler, and I really respect what he's doing, because he brings a new brand of physicality that kind of lacked before, and that it puts you in ball games.
The pass, Diebold now throws it here near side. Nice catch made by Taylor in traffic, and he breaks free at the 10, goes to the 5, he's into the end zone. Touchdown, Lancaster.
Set point in set 2 for River Ridge, 24 serving 19. Allie Wagner will line it across. Ball popped up by Cody, forwarded up by Drury, the runner by Hennessy into the net, and 4 hits, and River Ridge takes set 2, 25-19.
For Tyson Richard. Cummings to his right, takes a snap. Looks left. Rainbows deep downfield. It is caught. What a great.
Oh my goodness.
Number 16, Caden Brandt.
Back iron, no. Rebound in the paint. Patterson back right side. Quick again for 3 with 5 seconds. And she knocks it down. Braylon Quick.
Gives it up ahead to Riley. Back to Lucy. Slam dunk.
There's a pass to the corner. Inside to Batchelor. Backs in on McLean and ties the game.
With his head on the mat. That bites well usually for his opponent, and Denaro over on his back, and there's the ball. Time of 3:35 for Bryce Collins.
Directing traffic. Now she'll dribble drive into the paint. Back out, throw a 3. That's going to do it.
Ball over her head, looking for a teammate to pass to. Gives to Hodgson. Back to Howell. 3-pointer on the way. Knocks it down.
Now to Lucy. Stop and pop jumper, left side of the lane. Side iron, no. Boston with the putback.
Now dribbles over to the right side. Now stops it in the corner. Gives to Bunders. 6 seconds left. Bunders. Open shot. Right corner. Got it!
All right, moving on to the Ridge and Valley Conference. We have almost every Ridge and Valley Conference team on our QueenB Radio airwaves at some point during the season. And this is the last season that the Ridge and Valley will be competing as an 11-player conference. Wally Troughton, your thoughts on the Ridge and Valley Conference as a whole heading into this season?
I think it's an interesting conference. I mean, Ithaca has always been one of the top teams up there. Year in and year out. Then all of a sudden Highland showed up there and started creating a few issues that the Ridge and Valley wasn't prepared for, because Highland has always been one of those teams that, even if they're not built on talent, they're built on physicality. And if you end up and you won this week, they may have taken you out of a win next week because of just their physicality nature. Wazeeka Steuben Seneca is kind of the new kid on the block in some ways, but they're coming through pretty good. Seneca has had some tradition in the past where they've had some pretty good teams, but I think all of this has come together now. And so they're competing pretty darn well right now in that conference. The question starts coming after that. Iowa Grande is not what Iowa Grande used to be, but I think they're getting better. They've got a little more talent now than what they had here a while ago. And I think that it's not necessarily going to propel them to knock off Wazeeka Steuben Seneca or Ithaca, but it might be enough to make the playoff. It just might. It's going to be close. Riverdale?
Well, remember that Iowa Grande did make the playoffs last year. Kind of surprised everybody by doing that.
Exactly.
You know, when you have your quarterback back, you got a shot. As far as, so that's kind of Iowa Grande's story. You know, you talked about Wazeeka Steuben Seneca. That's been kind of a fascinating history, because the first year of that co-op, they didn't win a single game. And there were school board meetings where there were accusations that the coaches were favoring the other school. It was always the other school, obviously. And it really didn't look like it was going to go anyplace. Well, the next season, somewhat out of nowhere, they made the playoffs. The season after that, they actually went undefeated in the regular season. Unfortunately for them, they ran into Potosi Castle in the playoffs. But, nobody's talking about ending the co-op at Wazeeka Steuben Seneca anymore. They've gone from things are not going well to all of a sudden they're one of the better co-op programs in the area, and they're always finishing up at the top of the Ridge and Valley Conference. That fact right there, that this is the last year of the conference, and also the fact that it's the last year for Highland as an 11-player team, it's going to make this last season a really interesting season, I think, in the Ridge and Valley Conference for both of those reasons.
I agree completely. And as you take a look at all of this stuff, you've got the bottom three teams that are hoping that something positive can happen with Riverdale, Hillsboro, and Boscobel. Hillsboro has traditionally in the past been pretty good. All of a sudden, the bottom just dropped out of everything. And that's where they've been able to go, is down. And they're predicted to finish above Boscobel again this year. But again, like I said, Boscobel has a different attitude this year, and who knows what that's going to mean.
I think the other team. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the other team that could be the surprise in that conference is Riverdale, because almost everybody is back in Muscadet, and Riverdale was a competitive team for a while, and then they were not so competitive for the last several seasons, but. When you got everybody coming back, and as I said before, unless nobody improves from last year to this year and nobody was in the weight room, and I think those are both highly unlikely, Riverdale might really shock some people this season, possibly.
I think as you take a look at this conference, you look at Ithaca and Wazeeka Steuben Seneca, you're looking at the teams that are going to finish at the top. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Now what's going to happen after that? There's some real questions. And I think I agree with you with Riverdale. They're better. They're better than they were last year. Can Iowa Grande maintain what they gained last year? I think they can, but it's going to be an interesting in the middle of that conference. And at the bottom of it, can Boscobel actually win again this year? They're not going to make the playoffs again this year, like they never have. But maybe someday in the future.
Boscobel is the perfect example of what we've been talking about momentum in programs or negative momentum in programs, because, how many different coaches have they had over the past decade or so? Obviously, they have kids that some might say could play football that choose not to. I mean, they've been competitive in boys basketball the last few seasons. They've been, okay in baseball. So there are athletes there. But today's not what it used to be, where you automatically expect that nearly everybody will, come out for football. It's not like Highland, where apparently every male athlete does in fact come out for football. Coaches have to think more in a more contemporary fashion, I guess, and actually get players to come out and, make the experience not simply about you hit everybody for 2 hours and then you go do it again tomorrow. So basketball, their problems are not recent, and fixing them are not going to be recent, but they have shown a few signs that things are maybe getting better finally in basketball.
We can all hope for them.
For them, yes.
Yeah, I know we've been kind of going back and forth, last year about Highland deciding to go to 8-player football instead of co-oping to field an 11-player team. I look at teams like DeSoto, where when they switched to 8-player, it's worked out, pretty well for them. And now we're seeing how successful Belmont has been. I think Highland definitely is, going to be in that mix once 8-player does come around. But Steve, one final season as an 11-player team, one of the smallest school districts in the state to field an 11-player team, like you mentioned, I would anticipate they want to go out with a bang and take this conference as the Ridge and Valley 11-player conference, go into the Ridge and Valley 8-player conference next year as a conference champ.
To retire the title, basically. There's two things about Highland that I think some people who are just kind of casual observers might not notice. For one thing, if you look at their basketball team, they've got great athletes, and they've got a lot of great athletes. But the other thing, and I know Wally's going to appreciate this, until they moved to the Ridge and Valley, they were in the Six Rivers Conference. And what is the Six Rivers known for more than anything else? It is how physical, it's how physical they play. And I think Wally mentioned it before about, you play a team that was at the bottom of the Six Rivers, and okay, you beat them, but you sure paid a price for it. And then it ends up costing you the game next year. I'm pretty certain Highland took that physical nature with them to the Ridge and Valley Conference, so that I kind of thought that when they moved that, they might actually win a lot, and they've done very well for themselves in the Ridge and Valley. And I am positive that that whole physical thing is not going to go away when they go to 8-player next season either. But I think they do have a new coach, but they still, I think, have the same kind of tradition that they have had, and the same we're going to smack you around kind of physical nature. And I'm certain they would find a spot in the trophy case for the last Ridge and Valley Conference 11-player football title if they were able to pull off that feat.
And you know what? For all of us that have ever had the chance to go up to Highland for a ball game, something about being at Tyler Field and watching how the whole place there is totally Highland. It's Cardinals everything. And they have so much pride in everything they do that even at halftime of the homecoming game, I've seen the starting quarterback in the band. So
yes,
that pride in your community and pride in what happens in your school, that also makes a big difference.
Why do you think I sign up for that game every year? It's a terrific experience to announce it. That's actually with the new press box. That's actually one of my favorite places to do a game is Highland on those Saturday homecoming games.
Yeah, Highland definitely does things right, regardless of sport. But yes, definitely football. One of the best places in the area to take in a high school football game. One of the best.
Grow your business by enhancing your digital marketing efforts with QueenB Radio and Phase 3 Digital. We provide customized solutions based on your business's unique needs, including targeted advertising, website development, and search engine optimization. Contact us at 608-349-2000 or visit p3da.com/Platteville to learn more.
Last but not least, our 8-player football conference that we have our eye on. We're going to talk about the Belmont Braves coming off a state championship appearance last year, got all the way before Wausau Newman came away with the title, a very dominant Wausau Newman team at that. But Rob Spangler, you're entrenched in the Belmont community, and I think for not just for football, but across all sports for Belmont, they certainly had a banner year last year, and they're looking to keep that momentum heading into this season.
We talking about the 8-player transition, because there are small schools in Southwest Wisconsin that are going making that transition. It's touched on Highland, and there's various schools that may be considering it as well on the road because, quite frankly, what it is, it's just a numbers game. Scott Told, who's also joining us on this podcast, he goes certainly in the Belmont to their glory days in 11-player football when he took a team in the 2000s all the way to the state title game. But let's talk about right now, because as you mentioned, Tyler, last year, Belmont, a great run through the playoffs all the way to the championship game. They end up falling to a private school. Surprise, surprise. Scott Tolzman knows a thing or two about that back in 11-player days. But every single year that Belmont has been in 8-player since 2019, they've won. They have been successful. They have won. And even in the COVID year, the oddball 2020 season, they still had a winning record and basically won the de facto. I guess it wasn't a real state championship, but to them it was. And that's the way it's been ever since they've made that transition to 8-player football. It's been highly successful. And, for a program like Belmont, and I'll let Scott talk a little bit about this too, because he, again, knows the history. It's for them to be relevant again, because they had fallen, into a bit of irrelevance 7-player level. For them to be relevant, boy, it rejuvenates the community, rejuvenates the student body, and it does excitement in the communities. I think player football has been a real blessing for and you, DeSoto, Tyler, and I could see other schools, make that transition because of it. Scott, what say you?
Yeah, I agree. Belmont played 8-man football back before they started 11-man football in the early 70s, and they were very successful. And when I came in, we had to deal with a losing streak for a few years, and even my first year I was 0-9, and eventually we got through, and we did make it to state that one year, and semifinals a couple of years in a row, and then the number game, that hurts small schools. I mean, that had an effect on Belmont, and when they finally brought 8-man football in, it was a good thing for them to move that direction. Even though it's only 3 less players on the field, 3 less players makes a big difference in a small school. I mean, you can get by with maybe 16, 17 kids out for football in 8-man, where when you play in 11-man, that's pretty tough. So, and Belmont's always had some great players, and last year they had several good players, Carey and Lancaster. Those kids really stepped up for them, and unfortunately they graduated. So what's Belmont got this year is probably going to be a little bit unknown, but yet I think they'll be right up there with DeSoto. I think DeSoto is going to be the team to beat this year, and they don't lose much from last year's team, so it'll be a good conference.
I think one of the things that the average fan does not understand is the fact that the 8-player game is not the same game that the 11-player game is. I don't care if there's only 3 less players. It's not the same game. 11-player, you can line up and just run power football and do all those kinds of things. As a general rule, in 8-player, you don't do that, because everything, your field, They're playing on a different size field. You've got less kids covering everything. And 8-player is wide open football. It's the closest thing that American football has to the Canadian football about being wide open, because it is. And if you've got some kids with speed, oh, you're going to just dominate, because that's really what it is. It's a fast game. I remember being up in Boston when Belmont was up there playing Gilman. Probably the best all-around high school football game I've ever seen. It was exciting to the last play of the game when Speed from Belmont was able to not get that pass that would have been caught in the end zone by Gilman, and they would have won the game. But Speed took Belmont there. And as I look at it, and I look at all the teams we talk about that are going with the 8-player is looking ahead, Belmont's going to be still good. DeSoto's still going to be good. And as I go down through the Ridge and Valley that'll be there, I'm not so certain that all of them are going to be able to compete at that same level, because they don't have that combination speed with just a couple of linemen that can block. They're either loaded with linemen or they're not. And that's going to be an interesting thing. But I love 8-player. I thought it was going to be weird the first time I went over and did a game at Belmont. I loved it.
No,
I thought it was just so much fun.
And that's a really good point too, because you were talking about how not a bunch of, I guess, casual fans haven't really had the Highland experience. If you guys haven't been to a Belmont 8-man football game, it's just awesome. It is so fun to watch. They averaged 52.8 points per game in conference play last year, and it's just nonstop action. And kind of going back to the point too about consistency and coaching staff. I mean, Coach Weiss has done a great job since the transition, and yeah, you need to go out and see at least one game just to see it if you haven't yet.
Well, it's like anything else. Schemes do not win games; players win games, and I'm sure that any 8-player team would have taken a 250-pound quarterback, Riley Christensen, because no one wants to tackle a 250-pound quarterback coming up them at full speed. Riley was, of course, the quarterback when they won state, but they have. The thing about 8-player, I think, is that you don't need, for obvious reasons, you don't need as many players, but you still play. It still places a premium on athletic skill, and that again is what Belmont always seems to have. Riley Christensen wasn't there anymore, but the Paul Skills were, and then the Lancasters, and they've always been able the last few years to replace whoever graduates with guys who are, equally fast. And sometimes it looks like Belmont's playing on turf, and they're not playing on turf, but there's that much speed difference. And it still always comes down to the quality of the players. And the transition from 11-player to 8-player just meant that Belmont didn't necessarily need as many of them, but the great ones stood out. And, that is why they have done as well as they have since they've been an 8-player team.
I get a charge out of when you mentioned Christensen, because I remember him at that game up in Boston where he was on turf. I didn't realize he was that fast. He moved pretty doggone good for that size.
Yeah, speaking of checking them out, like Josh said, I mean, the nice thing is they do have a couple Saturday games. So if you want to get over and check out Belmont, I know we're going to be covering one of those Saturday games for sure on our QueenB stations. And yeah, they've got 2 different ones. I think actually their week 1 game, they start 1 week later than 11-player football. And their week 1 game is a Saturday game against one of the Green Bay area schools, Oneida Nation, Green Bay New Lutheran, I believe. So, so on a Saturday, come on over to Belmont on one of the Saturday games and check them out, because as Josh said, it is a lot of fun.
Awesome. It's awesome.
Yep, and Josh, you kind of alluded to this point earlier. One of the things that I love about Coach Weiss in the postseason run that Rob and I got to call games for, he will do different things that he'll do whatever he has to do to get his playmakers the ball. He'll put, Colby Lancaster is the primary quarterback. in the game against Wabeno Leona, Noah Fritz was lining up at the quarterback position to, take some snaps and, do some direct snaps, different motions, that type of thing. But one of the things that I think is overlooked about Belmont, that defense was awesome last year too. And for Belmont, it was do whatever it takes to win. If it was a low scoring game, Rob, I believe the game that you had against DeSoto in the playoff, 14-12 was the final score. You don't see those types of scores in 8-player football. It's kind of like Wally said, it's, CFL, maybe, old school arena football type stuff. When you have a 14-12 game in 8-player football, that says a lot about your defense. And when you have a defense like that, you can win against anybody.
Yeah, you can. And they have half of their defensive starters returning, which is good. The only negative, and this, I think somebody mentioned this, is, they really only have one returning offensive starter. So it's going to be a whole new look with both of the Lancaster boys gone and Fritz gone. It's going to be a whole new look on offense. But, as has been said, and it was said by Scott and other folks, it seems like they always have some good athletes waiting in the wings. So should be fun to see.
Yep. At this point, we give them the benefit of the doubt that they're reloading.
Let's take a look at the upcoming QueenB Radio High School sports schedule. The high school football season kicks off on Thursday night when the Dodgeville Dodgers take on the Viroqua Blackhawks at 7 o'clock on 97.7 Country WGLR. We'll have 3 games on the QueenB Radio family of stations on Friday night, including a matchup between the Lancaster Flying Arrows and the Mineral Point Pointers on 97.7 Country WGLR at 7 o'clock. The Platteville Hillmen begin playing their final season at Pioneer Stadium when they host the number 3 ranked Darlington Redbirds on Extreme 107.1 at 7 o'clock. On Super Hits 106, the Cuba City Cubans begin their 2023 campaign against the Benton Scales Mountain Shullsburg Knights. You can also watch this game on the QueenB Radio Sports YouTube channel at 7 o'clock. On Tuesday night, our volleyball coverage begins with the River Ridge Timberwolves taking on the Lancaster Flying Arrows at 7 o'clock on 97.7 Country WGLR and the QueenB Radio Sports YouTube channel. A reminder that weekly episodes of the QueenB Radio High School Sports Roundup begin next Thursday, August 24th. For more information about the show, go to am1590wpbl.com/sports roundup. That will wrap it up for our high school football preview edition of the QueenB Radio High School Sports Roundup. Thank you to our QueenB Radio High School football broadcasters for joining me to chat about the upcoming season, and a special thank you to Guy Kopp for joining us for the One-on-One with a Great One interview presented by People's State Bank. Enjoy week 1 of the football season, and we'll talk all about it on the next episode of the QueenB Radio High School Sports Roundup 1 week from Thursday. Thank you for watching on YouTube and listening on SoundCloud. We'll chat next time.